Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. The name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. I'd like to welcome you, dear viewers, to another in our series, The Forces of Evil. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah's peace and blessings be on each and every one of you. In our series, The Forces of Evil, we continue to look at how the satanic forces, the evil forces within our world, affect human beings in such a way as to deviate them from the path which God has prescribed for them, to cause them to swerve from that path into various forms of false worship, idolatry, etc., which then causes them to lose the benefit from this life. What good there is in it becomes lost when people lose that path and end up in forms of disbelief. Now, we looked at ways in the previous session related to the discouragement of righteousness. We're continuing to look now in terms of issues of satanic worship, where on one hand, where people take up legal systems which are other than the systems revealed by Allah, where Allah says, فَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهُ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Whoever doesn't judge by what Allah has revealed has become a disbeliever. We have divine revelation, guidance for us. And this is what should govern the lives of the Muslims. Where Muslims leave the principles of divine revelation and they accept and go wholeheartedly into systems of Western democracy, which is secular democracy, then they end up losing their way. Because these systems were basically designed for a society which didn't believe in God. By rejecting God, rejecting things which are attributed to God of revelation of goodness and righteousness, trying to define good and evil from a human perspective, with humanist values, developing new principles of determining good and evil, what they have done is they've created another set of confusion and chaos for society, because you cannot establish any forms of morality, with such a flexible system, a system wherein what is good today can become evil tomorrow, what is evil today can become good tomorrow. So such a system lacks any kind of moral foundation, and in fact becomes a form of satanic worship, where we end up worshiping our own desires. As Allah also says in the Quran, have you not observed the one who has taken as his Lord his own desires? And Allah says, describing some of the people of the past who went astray, اتَّخَذُوا أَحْبَارَهُمْ وَرُهْبَانَهُمْ أَرْبَابًا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. They took their rabbis and priests, monks, as lords besides Allah. That people, in attributing to these other sources the right to decide for human beings primary laws, then they end up making these other sources like gods. They've put them on the same level as God. Of course, as human beings, we may get together and try to work out some personal and individual need. We develop a principle which may not be applicable throughout the world. It just solves our individual problem here and now. However, the general principles which should govern people's lives throughout the world, wherever they may be, these principles need to come from God, so that it will be free of the human bias which tends to not fulfill principles of justice due to family considerations or personal considerations. People tend to favor others, favor family over others, and unfortunately this may even affect our very belief and practice itself. Also, what is introduced through this channel is that of grave worship, where people of the past who are righteous are now elevated to a point where we may call on them in worship, call on them in prayer, call on them in times of need, and this in fact ends up being a part and form of worship itself. So, and of course it becomes a satanic form of worship, because if we're not worshiping God, then ultimately we're worshiping Satan. If whatever we're calling God and we're worshiping and thinking it's God, And what we've ended up what the type of worship we end up doing is in fact a satanic worship, because the divinely ordained worship is one wherein we only direct our prayers to God alone. Now, one of the ways in which people may be drawn into satanic worship is also raising the issues of good and evil. Where did evil come from? If we have a good God, God is all good, He's all powerful, so where did evil come from? It must have come from an evil source in the world. This evil source has the power to create evil. We're not going to attribute it to God. So then what we have in fact is another God, a God of evil, as developed in the Persian system of dualism, where you had two gods, Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu, a god of good and a god of evil. And people ended up worshipping both gods. We also find amongst human beings Satans or devils working amongst us. Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, in a hadith narrated by Ibn Mas'ud, had said, Al-kahana hum shayateen al-ins. The fortune tellers are the devils amongst human beings. They function as devils. Why? Because they are inviting people into corruption. People are attracted to them because of what they offer. Everybody wants to know the future. Everybody would like to know what's going to happen tomorrow so I can, plan my business accordingly. You work on the stock market. You want to know which way stocks are going to go. So if somebody's able to offer you, a foolproof method or a method which is mostly right, then people are going to be attracted by such claims and such promises. You also find individuals in the past as well as in the present, who have attributed to themselves some form of godhood. You have today Sai Baba in India, who has over 8 million followers believing that he is God incarnate. He walks on the earth. He does a few magical tricks, and people are convinced that he in fact is God. We also have, in recent times, we have individuals like Sheikh Nazim al-Kubrusi, supposedly of the Naqshbandi Sufi order, who promises his followers, a variety of promises. They believe he can be in different locations at the same time. He promises them that when the time comes to die, he will take their soul to the angel of the next life. And that when we are being questioned in our state of the grave, that he'll be there to give us the answers, to prompt us with the answers. So he's sort of promising his followers guaranteed paradise if they submit their wills to him. These are various individuals who are involved in deviation, who act as satanic forces amongst human beings, and who call people ultimately to some form, shape or form of satanic worship, what we would call satanic worship. Because as we said in the very beginning, if we're not worshiping God, then we're worshiping Satan. Though we may call the gods we're worshiping a variety of different names, whether we call them Ganesh or Krishna or whatever, we give them those type of names, or we give them some other names, of other gods or spirits or whatever. It doesn't matter what name we give them. In the end, if we end up worshiping these individuals, they become a part and parcel of our worship, then we have destroyed our faith in God and in fact ended up worshiping other than God. Because these forces that we may think to worship are just equivalent to human forces. They depend on God for success and failure in their own lives, and they were creatures of God. They're not gods. They do not contain within themselves even the powers of God. So this basically, we could call this the fourth characteristic or the fourth area in which the satanic forces operate and create amongst humans some kind of confidence about something which is in fact satanic in its core, something which will bring them closer to disbelief than bring them closer to Allah. Because the way that the Prophet left is a very simple way. It's not very complicated. The pillars of Islam, pillars of Iman, how to do them, etc. They're very simple. Though it's a little elaborate, you could need somebody to explain it to us. But once we've understood it, it's very, very simple. Satanic force tried to make it complicated, make it confused, bringing in opinions, etc., of individuals who had no evidence to support their opinions. So in this way, Islam, which is very clear, very pure, becomes adulterated and loses its appeal and its attractiveness in the sight of people. So this constitutes our fourth basic area. Now, having looked at the various areas or various ways by which the satanic forces attack us, we need to learn how to prevent these forces from operating amongst us. And I will begin by suggesting one primary preventive method, and that is that we fear Allah and not these forces. The other forces are around us. We cannot stop them from being there. But that our fear of Allah should precede all else. And we have a verse in the Quran in which Allah says there, وَأَنَّهُ كَانَ رِجَالٌ مِّنَ الْإِنسِ يَعُوذُونَ بِرِجَالٍ مِّنَ الْجِنِّ فَزَادُوهُمْ رَهَقًا. Indeed, there were some among men who sought refuge in some among the jinn, but they, the jinn, only increased their fears. Whenever people, in those days, whenever people used to enter a valley, they would seek refuge in the jinn that resided there in the valley, so that the jinn would not terrorize them in their passing through. So they ended up, by depending on the jinn and calling on the jinn, in fact they ended up worshipping the jinn. So our first preventative method is that we fear Allah and not the jinn, that our fear should be directed towards Allah. It is the fear which helps to produce love in our hearts, because the love and the fear of God are two sides of the same coin. Love has to be there to do our righteous deeds. Out of love, ultimately, is what we strive for. Doing it because we've been commanded to do it is the basic. But doing it out of love of God, seeking to please God, this is the higher level. Now, satanic forces may try to dissuade us or may try to turn us away from this basic worship by what we spoke of before, creating doubts, making what is pleasing attractive to us, even though we know behind them there is sin. We also have discouragement from righteousness, and we also have where the satanic forces will influence even our dreams and our concepts. So what we need to do is to fear Allah. Our fear of Allah should be unique to Him. We don't fear Him the way we fear other creatures of God. A lion breaks loose from a cage, we're afraid of that. But we're afraid for the evil consequences that will happen if the lion catches us. In the case of Allah, we should fear Allah, fear His displeasure. Not fear so much the punishment that will come, because of course we should fear that. We should not want to fall into punishment. However, even more important, even though we don't necessarily know the reward of a particular act, but we know that it is something which has been prohibited, that the one who doesn't do it is rewarded, it's enough for us to try to do the things which are more pleasing to God, the things which will bring us into groups with other people who are striving to do the same. The other principle, in a ways of preventing satanic forces from destroying our lives, destroying the goodness in our lives, is that of working on our sincerity, that we are sincere in our worship of Allah. That it is only in that sincerity, if we have the correct knowledge of who Allah is, that we can really attain the true rewards from Salah. It has to be based on sincerity. And as Allah has told us in the Quran, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. They were only commanded to worship Allah, making the religion sincerely for Him. So this is this other area we have to work on, the area of sincerity, an area which each and every one of us lacks to varying degrees. The more we lack it, the less we are inclined to prayer. The more we have it, the more we are inclined to our prayers themselves. Now, The other area which could be added to this of preventative areas is that of using the various supplications which the Prophet gave in our daily walk of life, whether it be going to the bathroom, things concerning the home, and we're going to look at the home issues in more detail, but even things concerning outside the home, where Allah has told us through His Prophet ﷺ that there is danger, there are satanic forces and harm out there if we don't try to keep within certain bounds. For example, the Prophet ﷺ had said that we should bring children in from the outside about an hour before Maghrib, and neither ourselves nor our children should be left outside of the home after Maghrib. It's a basic teaching of the Prophet. It's a basic teaching because of the fact that it is common amongst us today to let our children out to play. And there is danger when the night falls, because we have even a chapter at the end of the Quran called Al-Falaq, where Allah says there, and seek refuge in Allah from the night when it falls. مِنْ غَاسِقٍ إِذَا وَقَبْ, from the night when it falls. Because there is harm. Much of the corruption, etc., takes place at night. The evil forces are more free to operate during the night. Also, with regards to this, is that we try to seek refuge in Allah when we become angry, to avoid excessive anger, because it can cause people to go astray. You hear of people trying to do the right thing, but they're angered by people who are also themselves trying to do good, but their method of trying to promote good, for example, amongst them may not be good. So it leads another person to want to reject the good that they're offering, to turn away. Sometimes people even say, okay, I don't even want to have anything to do with this, religion, if you're going to tell me this and you're going to tell me that, etc. These are satanic ideas which will come into our minds, where we may actually seek to abandon what is good for us, out of pride and out of jealousy and these kind of emotions. Now, as I said, we need to look at the ways to prevent the harm from coming to us. I've given some general guidelines. In our next series of programs, what we're going to look at are the basic methods and modes and practices that we can do to prevent satanic forces from affecting our homes, because this is the foundation of society, and this is the area most important. Many of these principles may be applied outside the home also, but primarily, first and foremost, it should be focused in the home itself. With that, dear viewers, I'd like to thank you for being with us in this segment of our program, The Forces of Evil. This is your host, Dr. Bilal Phillips, presenting this program. I hope you have enjoyed and benefited from this segment, and I hope you'll continue to follow our coming segments. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.